There we go.
All right. Hi. So this is my very dear friend Caroline, who is an middle school teacher of Latin, and she has kindly agreed to answer these questions for us. So, Caroline, first up, what would be the optimum learning situation for learning?
So I think the best learning environment is one where you can get as many kids as possible in your room engaged and excited about the material that you're trying to cover. That can be tricky because a lot of kids feel engaged and excited in different environments. I always have some kids that are really excited to just have a lecture and something going on the board, and other kids that really want to be playing a game. So it can be tricky to balance that. But yeah, I think whatever you can do to get the whole room interested and invested and get some buy-in for what you're doing, I think is the best learning environment.
That's really awesome and actually goes along with a lot of the things that we've been learning in class. So, kind of some specific questions to dive in a little bit deeper in that. What would the teacher be doing in that situation?
So I think the teacher in kind of optimum learning environments is really there as kind of a guide, a little bit of a referee, somebody that can keep almost like a herding dog, keep everybody together, keep everybody moving in the right direction, but isn't necessarily just up at the board talking at students. I think that is sometimes, as a teacher, it can feel like the easiest way to deliver information. Just, I have information, they need information, I'll just tell them. But it's it can be really easy to lose students when you do that, especially if they're younger kids that don't necessarily automatically care about your subject material. I was a Latin teacher. The kids in my class didn't choose Latin. It's a subject that's hard to kind of look around their daily lives and see a lot of use and purpose for. And so a lot of what I was doing was explaining to them why it was important, but also inviting them to enjoy it and inviting them to be excited about it, usually through classroom games or different review projects, anything that could kind of get them at least a little bit interested, at least open to learning some Latin. That was what I was always what my goal was as a teacher. So I think the role of a teacher is to just try to get everybody on board, pointed in the same direction, and kind of be a little bit of a team leader, a little bit of a cheerleader, whatever they need.
Yeah, and I think a little bit of what you mentioned there might be part of the next question as well, because you mentioned things like games and revision activities. So if the teacher is functioning as the guide and, as you put it, kind of like the herd dog, which I love that, what are the students doing?
So ideally, if they're engaged, if they're excited about the material, if they're invested in whatever we're doing in class that day, they're kind of leading the group. They're working together, they're sharing information, they're actively working towards some kind of goal. So, one of my favorite ways to teach, this is less to teach new material, but more to reinforce material that they had learned at some point, was to play a game that I called Circus Maximus, which was basically to break my kids up into teams. Um, they would each send a representative up to the board. I, as the teacher, would call out some kind of challenge. Maybe they were declining a noun, maybe they were conjugating a verb, and they would race to finish. And it was a great way to visually check in with my students and see how they were doing, and a great way to get a little snapshot in time of where each kid in the class was with the skill that I was trying to teach them. But also because it was a game, the kids at the board were really excited and invested in finishing the project. And the kids in their seats were also really excited and invested in what was happening on the board. Once I had kind of set up the game and gotten the buy-in of everybody, there wasn't much for me to do. I was just shouting out nouns for them to deal with. And they were talking to each other, they were writing things down, they were excited, students in their seats were checking nouns on the board because they were interested to see who was doing it properly.
Okay, we had a slight technical issue there, but we're back. Caroline, was there anything that you wanted to finish up with what students would be doing in this situation? Circus Maximus sounds like a
Yeah,
delight.
it's a lot of fun. And I think the point that I'm trying to get at is that if I, as a teacher, can set up a game or set up a situation and invite my kids to participate in that in a way that I know that they will find exciting and engaging. If I've done that work ahead of time, I mean, I think about when my kids walk into the room when I've set up Circus Maximus, they're already excited. They're already like raring to go. They have a routine that they understand. They know the rules. They know what their day is going to look like, and they're excited to be there. So I think that in this kind of optimum learning environment, kids can walk in and know what's expected of them, know what their day is going to look like, and know that it's going to be fun, know that they're going to get to do a little bit of what they want to do in the classroom, even if it's a subject that I chose. They're excited to be there and they're ready to be engaged and to learn and to review, practice, whatever it is we're doing. So I think that as a teacher, if you can do that prep work in an optimum learning environment, kids walk in and they're ready to go.
Yeah, I totally understand what you're talking about. It actually reminds me of, and I'm wondering if I got this idea from you. When I was teaching Latin online, I had my kids who were Harry Potter obsessed do house cups. So they would always get excited when they came into class and the banner was in that classic Harry Potter text because they knew we were doing a review game and they were very competitive. I wouldn't go so far as to say bloodthirsty because, you know, there was a lot of honor amongst them, but middle schoolers, they want to win.
They're ready to go. Yeah, and it can be big lessons, these kind of big involved games. It can also be very small. I used to keep a small stuffed animal of a dragon in my classroom, and he was our vocabulary dragon. And if we had, 5 or 10 minutes at the end of class, we would bust out the dragon. And they knew that it was going to be a vocabulary review game. They knew that they had already prepared for it and that this was a time to kind of practice their vocabulary for an upcoming quiz. And we would just toss the dragon around and check on our vocabulary skills. And again,
That
it's a
is
great
so
way to
much
kind
fun.
of, for me to check in and see how they're doing, but also for them to be excited about a game. They're throwing a stuffed dragon around the room. They want the stuffed dragon to be tossed to them, and so they
Yeah,
have to know their vocabulary to get it.
what every kid wants is school sanctioned throwing something.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway, another thing that you mentioned that I caught on to as I was listening was talking about how if you had prepared it, the kids could kind of take the material and go. What kind of learning materials would students be using? What did it look like?
So for Latin, especially in those early classes when students are just starting out, a lot of it is there's a lot of brute force memory to get vocabulary, to get the grammar rules, to lay some foundation so that later on they can have a lot more understanding of the material. They can do things like translate, they can do things like draft sentences in Latin. But unfortunately, a lot of the foundation involves memorization, which is very difficult to get a 12-year-old on board with. I'm going to need you to memorize these 250 words. So I think as teachers, sometimes we don't get to pick fun material all of the time. I wouldn't say that there's a lot that's like inherently fun about memorizing vocabulary words. So I think as teachers, it's part of our job to, be a little bit like salesmen, really kind of talk up the material, explain why they're doing it, like I said, kind of get them on board. I think especially in middle school, students can just feel like they show up and they have no control over what's going on. They don't get to pick their subjects. They're just there. They have to learn math. Everybody tells them that math is important. They don't necessarily believe that. And so I think as a teacher, it's important to build in some time to get kids on board with material, with like, you know, like the subject matter, the content. As far as like learning materials, is like what's physically in front of them. I think it's good to kind of keep that changing from time to time, especially if you can do something different from whatever their baseline is kind of across classes. So the nature of the beast, kids are going to have pencil and paper and a notebook in front of them, and they're going to be putting notes in their notebook. And that's great. That's a valuable skill. But I think anytime as a teacher, you can step away from that and create an environment where it's okay for kids to step away from that and try something different and, you know, learn vocabulary while tossing a dragon around, or come up with Latin chants to cheer their team on as they're playing Circus Maximus. I think that those are really valuable moments. And those are kind of the moments where you can get kids really excited about the material that you're teaching.
I absolutely love that. I know that I would have learned our Latin vocab a lot faster if any of our professors had let us throw around a stuffed
Yeah.
animal dragon.
Yeah.
That's a great image I'm going to save for later. Anyway, I have one last question for you. What would assessment look like? A lot of the things that you've mentioned to me are really in line with formative assessment, figuring out where kids are along the way. Is there anything you'd want to add to that?
So I think it's tricky because there's kind of the practical requirements of assessments where you need to be able to collect some kind of data to track students. And when you multiply that out, when you have, you know, 20 students in your class, you're teaching 5 classes, the number of students that you need to practically track impacts how you collect data. And I know that when I was first teaching one of the things that I struggled with was designing assignments to check, to like assess where they were, that were interesting for them, but also possible for me to process at a certain volume. And there were some assessments like diagramming sentences that were so valuable for students and such an interesting and intricate way to check their knowledge, but were just, when multiplied out to be, you know, 120 students that I was responsible for, not a great way for me to check in, and for me to give them feedback. So it's tricky because on a practical side, you do have to balance those needs and know that as a teacher, you know, expecting yourself to grade 120 sentence diagrams every day is just not a practical way to design your class. So on the practical and realistic side, it's important for assessments to be efficient in kind of getting a snapshot of where a student is in their comprehension of material in a way that's meaningful to you as the teacher. But if we're just kind of dreaming up ideal scenarios, a lot of my like preferred assessments are some of those more informal assessments. The games I know were really enjoyable to the students because they got to, you know, write on the whiteboard. You'd be surprised how desperately a 12-year-old middle school student just wants to write on the big whiteboard up front. And so they're excited about that. But for me, it was a really valuable way to get kind of a high level overview of where my class was as a whole. And I think that those moments were really important because a test where students, you know, sit down and take an assessment and turn it in, and then that's their grade for the unit, is a really valuable way to reflect on what you've done in the past as you like move forward. Usually they're your transition out of a unit. But these kind of informal assessments on a day-to-day basis, I think are so valuable as check-ins, as snapshots of where your students are, as like reminders of like, there were times where I would ask students to do something on the board and I would have all 4 students fail to complete. And for me, that was an important reminder of like, oh, I did not adequately teach that to my students. They don't understand. And that was a 30-second game in the middle of class, and I only had to check 4 students. So it's kind of a roundabout answer, but I think that ideal assessments are quick. They're designed in a way that's engaging and exciting for students, but they're also able to give you as the teacher a very quick understanding of where the comprehension level in your room is and where the comprehension level of individuals are.
Yeah, honestly, I really agree with you. And we are at the end of all this. I already knew that you had amazing teaching instincts, but it was really fun to dive deeper into it. So thank you again for agreeing to answer these questions. And let's wave to sign out the video.